Hello, friends. Welcome aboard the Round Trip Stories podcast, where we share stories of moving around the world and back again, reflecting on the lessons we've learned along the way. My name is Tracy.
And my name is Melissa, and we are so glad you're joining us for today's episode. Our guest today is Stanley Asasu, doctor and writer from Ghana, Africa. In 2015, Dr. Stanley moved away from his country for the first time to pursue his dream of becoming a medical doctor through a Wuhan, China university program to educate foreign doctors. After an emotional adjustment, he found his support system through his international classmates and friends from church. He filled his 5 years with studying medicine and Chinese, tutoring others in English, and even wrote a book on the side. So buckle your seatbelts and make sure your tray tables and seats are in their upright positions as part one of Stanley's round trip story gets ready for takeoff.
All right. Welcome to our Round Trip Stories podcast. Today we have a special guest. This is Dr. Stanley Asasu from Ghana, but we met in Wuhan, China, and that was a number of years ago, and we are just so privileged to have him on our podcast today. Welcome, Stanley.
Thank you so much, Tracy. It's a pleasure to be with you.
We are really looking forward to hearing your stories. So, Stanley, before we get into your stories of your traveling and moving abroad, we want to hear a little bit of the backstory. So if you could tell us a little bit about yourself and your family, where you grew up to start with, that would be great.
Well, thank you. So, as you rightly pointed out, my name is Stanley Asasu. I have a traditional name, which is also like a middle name for me, which is admittedly a little difficult to pronounce, even though it has a great meaning, and that is Anenyemele. So Anenyemele is my traditional name, which loosely translates to treasure.
Oh.
And so I have that. So the full name actually is Stanley Anenyemele Asasu. I'm a medical doctor. I trained in the People's Republic of China, Wuhan specifically, which was how and when I got to meet Tracy and her lovely family. I come from a family of 6. So I have 3 other siblings. I'm the oldest. I have 2 little sisters. The last born, my family is a boy. So there's the 4 of us. I actually grew up in a very small village in one of the regions of Ghana. It's actually in the eastern part of Ghana, quite close to the Ghana-Togo border. That's where I did a lot of my basic education up until I had finished what we call junior high school, before I went on to senior high school in the northern regional capital of Ghana, called Tamale. The dream had always been to study medicine someday and to be a doctor. So that was the background, briefly, for me.
And okay, how did you end up going to medical school in China from Ghana? Tell us about that.
That's an interesting question, actually. So when I finished high school initially in 2013, like I said, I had put in applications to a couple of Ghanaian medical schools. The first year I put in an application, I didn't get accepted into a medical school in Ghana. So the plan initially for me was to try again the year after. And then whilst I was still home and waiting to put in an application again, a family friend of mine actually spoke to me one time and he said, "Hey, Stan, have you thought about going to med school abroad? I mean, there's countless numbers of med schools abroad, and why don't you think through that?" And he actually went on to suggest a couple of destinations, which included China. And so fast forward, my parents were put in an application. We went through the various processes, and eventually I got accepted to med school in Jianghan University. And it's funny because initially I had no idea what Wuhan was like. I didn't know much about Wuhan. Then I got into Wuhan only to discover that Wuhan was actually one of the educational hubs in China and, in fact, in the world. I was pleasantly surprised to find out that at the time, Wuhan had the largest number of college students in any single city in the entire world, and that greatly amazed me.
That's amazing.
Yes, over 10% of Wuhan's population at the time was just like students. And so that was how I found myself in China and in Wuhan specifically. And I must say, I do not regret the experience there at all.
Me neither. Okay, Stanley. So now we're going to hear your stories about your time living abroad and how that went. So please tell us a story about your initial transition and adjustment.
Well, it's quite an emotional one, I must say. I remember when I was leaving Ghana to China at the time, I had just turned 20. So I was just, um, if you like, a young adult who was now leaving my home country, leaving my family and friends and everybody, and just stepping into the unknown. And I didn't know what to expect. At that tender age, I had never traveled abroad. It was my first time ever on an airplane. And that was just plain hard, even boarding the flight and just being there alone and going that long distance without being in touch with family until I had arrived in China. Um, that was just so difficult emotionally, I must say, for me. And mind you, before going to China, I hadn't studied any Chinese language, and so I could not communicate with anybody. I didn't know anyone in China except for the young man that was scheduled to have met me at Beijing International Airport. Now, unfortunately, before I left Ghana, due to some miscommunication between the person that had done the arrangement for me to meet him in Beijing and himself, the person that was supposed to pick me up at the Beijing International Airport did not know that I was arriving in China that day.
Oh, no.
And he had no idea I had landed. My cell phone wasn't working because I was in a different country, obviously. I couldn't speak Chinese, and so I couldn't communicate with anybody. And there was just no way to reach him. And there I was, just stuck at the airport. And the young man that was supposed to meet me at the airport was in Tianjin. Tracy probably would know that Tianjin is quite a distance from Beijing.
Yes.
So even when I eventually got to talk to him, he couldn't come to pick me up at the airport the same day. So whilst waiting and wondering, awaiting the arrival of my luggage, I was fortunate that I saw, so there was this young man who was on the same flight with me from Cairo. In my estimation, I thought he was probably Arab, judging by his looks. So eventually I mustered courage to just talk to someone, and he happened to be close to me. So I just walked over to him like, hey, listen, I'm really stuck. This is the situation. I'm not sure what to do. Lo and behold, this young man was actually a Ghanaian Egyptian. And he was returning from Ghana at the time after having gone home to do his senior clerkship in one of the hospitals in Ghana. And he was returning to school for his final year of med school.
Oh my gosh.
So, of course, having lived in China for over 5 years, he was well vexed with the knowledge, with the language, and so he was able to take me to the information desk. He spoke with them. They were able to talk to the young man that was supposed to pick me up. And when they called him, I said, "Listen, I had no idea you were coming today." And at the time, he was in Tianjin. The best thing it seemed was for me to lodge at a nearby hotel, and then he would travel over the following day to pick me up. Now, I would say, amidst all these challenges, I probably have not even touched the most difficult for me, and that was my first night ever and my first shower ever in China. Now, picture this. This is a little, Ghanaian boy who had lived all his life in the warm and mostly humid climate in Ghana, in northern Ghana. who had just landed in China. And at the time, it was winter. And it was my first winter experience ever.
It is so cold in Beijing in the winter.
I had no, I had no way to even interpret the Chinese writings, the characters and all. And so I couldn't read. And then I got bussed away by the shuttle bus of the hotel from the airport to the hotel. Then I checked in, and I just thought, my goodness, it's been such a long time of flying. I think it was probably close to 20 hours in total. And I just wanted to take a shower and crash into bed.
Yes.
And that was where the problem was now, because it was winter and I wanted to at least have a warm shower, but I did not know, because I couldn't read, I did not know how to get myself some warm water. Of course, I called the receptionists to come help me out, but I was wondering how I was going to talk to them and make them understand that I needed some warm water to shower.
Uh-huh.
And so, believe it or not, I eventually had a cold shower on a cold winter night on my first day in China.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry.
And that was just horrible. I mean, it was horrible. But I went away. I went ahead and did it anyways because I just felt I needed a shower.
Yeah.
Then, thankfully, I was able to connect to the Wi-Fi of the hotel, and then I got to talk with my parents back home. I spoke with my family, and that was really comforting. At least after I spoke to them and told them, well, I had arrived in China safely, and the young man was going to meet me up the following day to pick me up, they were also relieved. And yeah, I guess all was good that ended well.
Tell us a story about something else that was hard in general, living in Wuhan, China.
Okay. So, because I had some initial delays in Ghana, and so by the time I reported to school, I was almost 2 months late to class. And my classmates had already, studied the Chinese language for about 2 months before I joined. And when I joined the language class, this was me just sitting in class and wondering. I kept hearing on a daily basis, Dong Lama, Dong La, but it sounded to me like Thomas because Dongla sounds a lot like Thomas.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure Tracy understands what Donglama means, which in Chinese really means, do you understand or do you understand something?
Oh.
And for me, all I heard was Thomas Ma. And what really didn't help issues was I had a classmate from Uganda who was called Thomas.
Oh.
So I sat in the language class each day and I kept wondering why the professor kept asking the class Thomas Ma and they would respond Thomas. And it just every day I kept wondering. But I just didn't have the courage to also just find out what was happening, at least for someone to explain to me.
Yeah.
So it went on for quite a while before one day I gathered courage and I went to talk to my professor. I asked her why they kept saying Thomas Ma in class. And then she told me, no, they weren't saying Thomas. She was actually asking Dong Lama. And Dong Lama in Chinese means, do you understand? And so each time she asked Dong Lama, she was actually double checking if the class understood whatever concept it was she was teaching in the Chinese language class. And my goodness, that was such an eye opener. And it really helped me to at least break the ice. And then I started trying to learn from my colleagues and studying a lot harder, trying to catch up with them. So even that initial step when I started my language lessons in school was really difficult because, as I put it, at the time that others were flying, I was now learning to crawl.
Yeah.
And that was just really, really difficult for me to start.
So I'm curious, were all of your medical classes in Chinese?
The classes were actually in English language.
Okay.
So in China, different universities actually offer different training or instruction in different languages. So there are universities that actually teach you your major courses in Chinese language, and there are those ones that give you the laxity of choice to have your major studies in English language whilst also studying Chinese language alongside, of course, as a requirement for graduation in China, according to the Ministry of Education. So in my university, we studied medicine in English language, but we were required to study and pass at least the Chinese language proficiency test examination level 4, which was called the HSK4, Hanyu Xue Kao Shi.
Stanley, your Chinese is so good. I'm
Thank
so
you.
jealous. Okay, tell us a story about something that you loved.
Okay. I must say, I loved so many things in China and about China. But at the end of third year of medical school, there was a time I just sat and I thought, well, I was sort of stuck in a bubble of sorts, the Wuhan bubble, as I call it, because by then I had built for myself a very rigid scheme of doing things. It was always about the library and studies. In fact, myself and a couple more of my friends frequented the library so many times so that some of our classmates actually nicknamed us library merchants, right? so so it was all about the library and studying. And of course, I was involved in a couple of activities at Wuhan Foreign Fellowship as well.
That was our church.
Right, at church. Um, I helped to organize some of the African students that were in the foreign fellowship. And during Christmas and Easter seasons, we would do like some singing and we would do some spoken word,
Mm.
etc. That was a big part of my life there too. And I totally, totally loved doing that every time. And of course, I was also involved in some training and mentoring of some friends, some Chinese friends. I got the opportunity at one time to teach in one of the faculties of my university as an English language tutor, even whilst I was a medical student.
Wow.
So, I mean, that was a really wonderful part of my journey as well, because it gave me the opportunity to have like some cross-cultural interactions. Um, and as I like to look at it, this was an African young man teaching Chinese students English language. And that was like a complete mix of so many things. And just learning from all these different cultures and interacting with people was a big part of my life on campus. So I missed doing all these things. Life outside of Wuhan was something I barely knew. And so I remember during the summer vacation or so, I thought to myself, why didn't you just take a moment and step outside Wuhan and just explore other parts of China? Well, so one of my friends, Nicole Knighton, so she had relocated from Wuhan to Suzhou, and she had asked if I was interested in visiting because we hadn't seen each other in a long time. She was a good friend when she was in Wuhan. So yes, that summer vacation, I thought, well, I was going to visit Nicole in Suzhou. And oh my word, it was one of the best experiences I had in China. We visited so many beautiful tourist attractions. And then later we visited Shanghai. And I just learned a lot on that journey and also getting to interact with different people. I loved going on that journey because not only did I get to explore other parts of China, but I also got to learn quite a bit on that journey. So, for instance, when we traveled down to Shanghai, I remember on our way down to the band to see the Oriental Pearl Tower, we came across this building that said the International Opium Commission Building. And I was really curious about that. I was wondering what it was all about. And so Nicole and I went over. I told her I wanted to take a look at it. We went over. Huge, huge, huge building and really beautiful. Then there was this plaque they had displayed on there, and the plaque was talking about the opium wars that China was, involved in some time ago in an attempt to like stop the illicit trade of opium. Back then when the British had attempted to infiltrate China
With all the opium.
with opium. And it helped me really to understand, at least in part, the basis for China's hard stance against drugs. Because after I went back to sort of read around quite a lot about the opium wars and how they came about and how that helped shape modern Chinese society. and attitude towards drugs. So, I mean, that's just one example of what I benefited from taking that journey beyond just it being an adventure. And so, yes, I really loved that. It was a major part of my life in China.
Yeah, so tell us a story about something that surprised you.
Okay, so this was probably in third year or fourth year of med school. One of my professors who taught me Chinese language, it was time for the annual Chinese Spring Festival, and she invited me over to visit with them to the countryside, to her village at the countryside, to experience the Spring Festival at the countryside. So yes, I was interested, so I decided to go. And then um, we went down to the village was called Yincheng, and we went down to Yincheng village, which was I think probably just an hour and a half drive from Wuhan. Then like all the various activities that they did and all the traditions and customs that they practiced during the Chinese New Year festival, I found them quite similar to many um, African, or if you would like, Ghanaian traditional religious practices
Huh.
and beliefs. For instance, so her family, they were Buddhists, right? And during the Spring Festival celebrations, they did stuff like praying to the ancestors and offering sacrifices to the ancestors, essentially ancestral sacrifice and worship. They did stuff like the tomb sweeping. I think in China there's a big festival called the Tomb Sweeping Festival.
Mm-hmm.
And well, in Ghana or in Africa, I don't know of any cultures or people that do that do practice tomb sweeping. But at least um, things like pouring libation and the whole idea of offering parts of, well, if you like, the first fruits of whatever they had gathered in the course of the year to their ancestors, and praying for blessings and guidance for the year that was coming up and stuff like that. Interestingly, some highlights of traditional African belief systems and Ghanaian belief systems, and I just found that, whoa, um, these are two different people on two different continents, but just somehow there are
Yeah.
similarities in some of the beliefs. That greatly surprised me, honestly. But then again, it just helped me to see how, though we might be different, we at the same time are so alike in some ways.
So tell us something that you learned about yourself as a result of living in China.
Well, so it was in China that I published my first two books and started working on the third. And so the feedback from the readership and people who had bought into my works and had followed what I was doing really inspired me a lot. And I must say, I did not know the power that I wielded through my writing.
Ah.
I did not think of myself necessarily as a writer because even though I had started doing some manuscripts, etc., before I came over to China, I hadn't published any of them, and they were just things that I was writing down. But after I published my first and second books, and people had bought into the books, and I got the feedback from them how, for some of them, it had helped them to rediscover themselves and had helped them to shape their thinking processes and things like that.
Hmm.
Um, I guess I got to learn that there was a lot more I could offer my world, and not necessarily just that I could do not just by being a doctor, but beyond that by also putting my thoughts to paper and sharing with the
Hmm.
world. So that's another thing I learned about myself, the fact that there's a lot more I could offer the world than being a doctor. So it was really good to see.
That's beautiful and so inspiring. And I want to read your books. So we will have to find out how we can do that. So you've shared with us these really insightful things you learned about yourself. So the last question is, what did you learn about the world as a result of your time in China?
Okay. I learned that our environment plays a huge role in shaping our outlook to life. For instance, I had come over from Ghana to Wuhan. Ghana is what we consider a democratic society, and I'd come over to China that is more communist than democratic, you would say. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I had come from a background where, for instance, we could challenge authority if we felt they were wrong on certain things or certain issues, or if we felt they were doing things wrong, and we could question authority. And then I came over to China, which was a society where that was not necessarily present. And it was like you had to sort of try to understand life from their perspective. Because if you grow up in a society where you aren't, you know, allowed to fully express yourself or your thoughts or even question authority, you see things differently than for someone who had always thought, well, if I felt something was being done and not being done well, I could question, I could suggest, I could propose for things to be changed, you
Mm-hmm.
know? And so I realized how in China, for instance, it appeared as though, whatever the government said was what everybody had to do and nobody really had to question. And that was just, it was strange for me, but at the same time, gradually I began to see things a little bit from their perspective, even though
Yeah.
I may not fully agree with them. So it helped me in shaping my responses and interactions with people in that part of the world.
Mm.
Um, the second thing that I learned was the fact that we're all so different, right? Yet we're also alike. And that was something really beautiful that I got to learn,
Mm-hmm.
that in spite of the apparent differences that humanity has, um, we all basically aspire to the same things, right? Every society everywhere aspires to having good education and good infrastructure, right, and good standards of living. And so just that process of going over to China and learning, because I had classmates from all over the world, and seeing what their aspirations were like and learning from their cultures and their traditions, I realized that externally we might be so different, yet internally we're just so alike. And that was
Mm-hmm.
really powerful for me to take away with me.
Thank you, Stanley. Thank you, Dr. Stanley, for sharing your round trip stories from Wuhan, China. Stanley made the most of his time studying medicine in Wuhan. In addition to the value he holds for his medical training, he valued each relationship he made with his international classmates and faith community, Chinese students he tutored, fellow writers, and the Chinese culture of his host country. He understood that he and those around him, although from different places, desire the same things in life, like a good education, infrastructure, family, and personal opportunities. Stanley says, "We're all so different. We're all so alike." Well, what happened when Stanley returned to Ghana? He almost did not make it out before Wuhan was shut down from the COVID-19 pandemic. You'll have to make a return trip to our podcast for part 2 of Stanley's round trip story to see how he made it out and how it went in Ghana when he got back.
Want the podcast equivalent of early boarding and first-class seating? Be sure to subscribe to this podcast in your favorite podcast app so you never miss an episode. And if you enjoyed this podcast, would you consider sharing it with your fellow globetrotting friends? We would love to encourage them too.
As this episode lands, we hope these stories have encouraged you, helped you find some more of your belongings, and made your baggage a little lighter. Thanks so much for listening, friends. We'll see you next time.